Greetings, intrepid adventurers. I am Whisper. Welcome back to the library. Today, we are starting on a brand new journey. I'm sure you've all seen it done before. It is by no means a new idea, but I am still quite excited. Anyhow, we are starting on the path of trying someone else's writing process. I've seen a lot of people do it with famous people mostly. However, I thought it'd be fun to poke around a bit on Booktube and look at other writers and try their processes. Today, we're taking a look at Anna New. She has a lot of great content about writing, and I really recommend going and subscribing to her. I recently watched this video of hers, in which she made a whole dive into her process for drafting and writing. She actually made a more recent video too. They're very similar, so I'm going to try mushing the two together. We are going to be making this into a 3-part series, which I'll go over here in a minute. I wrote a breakdown of all the steps from her videos. In the first one, she breaks it down into 4 steps. Step 1. Brainstorm document. You put all your ideas on this document, your premise, your characters, messages, etc. It's your messy document, just brain vomit onto it. That's the whole idea. Step 1.5, polish it up. Write a blurb about your book, including project name, genre, vibe/theme, length, and a 1-sentence summary. And then you break the document into headings. Characters, settings, scenes, magic system, quotes, etc., etc. And this is what you keep a running notes list on. From there, step 2 is to start place plotting. You list out different settings or places your characters can go in the world, and figure out what they can do there. Because your character needs to be able to move within your world. And then, after that, you take your place plotting table and start on a 0 draft for step 3. You look at your settings and begin to make a chapter number plot chart, which is really set up as dialogue and setting, or action and dialogue, depending on how you want to look at it. And then, after that, off to make your first official draft, which is using that 0 draft and stitching all of your pieces together. Honestly, place plotting is probably the smartest thing I've ever heard of. I don't know why I didn't think of something similar sooner. Honestly, it's such a smart idea. I guess I just had this rigid idea in mind of you have to do a traditional outline and then just cannonball yourself straight into your first draft. No floaties, no anything. Just straight up launching headlong into your first draft. I never really thought of pre-plotting or figuring out how to move your characters around in the world. I'm really hoping this helps my brain function enough to piece together a book. I'm determined to finish an entire novel this way. In the second video, everything was pretty similar, but there were a few steps different or more focused on the inspiration before actually working on your story. The second video broke it down into 5 steps. Some could be considered more advice than anything. Step 1, what is your book about? Put together your genre and your vibe. And there you go. Step 2, go to Pinterest, look up your genre and your vibe plus the word aesthetic. And then go through the search results and find places you can use as settings. And then from there, you set up your settings scene table for your place plotting. Just like discussed in the other one. You know, taking the settings that you found and writing possible things that can happen in these places. What does your character think of these places? Step 4, pick a starting point. It can be the most exciting of the scenes that you wrote out. And finally, 5, find the links between the scenes. There's one idea that I had in particular that I think works perfectly to test this out. It's a fantasy horror set in a high fantasy world like The Witcher, Lord of the Rings, D&D, that sort of thing. I've dabbled a little in the idea, but I haven't spent too much time on it. I'm hoping that this process will help me find my footing to breathe life into it properly, to actually write the story I want to write. I'm going to be breaking the series down into 3 parts. The first will be covering outlining, just gathering all of the setting inspiration, putting down what ideas I have, doing all of the setup that needs to be done. The second video will cover drafting, putting together the scene table, doing some place plotting, and working on the zero draft. And finally, the last one will be actually piecing everything together to make a coherent first draft, and probably, doing the after stuff like editing and all that sort of fun jazz. This is the format I'll be following. This is the 2 videos squished together into a single writing process. So step 1 will be brainstorm document. Absolute word vomit. Putting down all the ideas, the premise, the characters, blah blah blah. Step 2, polish up that document. Keep it as an ongoing. Put down my book blurb and do all of my headings. Step 3 will be place plotting, in which I'll go on Pinterest, look up the genre and vibes aesthetic, just like from the second video, make a list of all the potential settings, figure out what can happen in these places. My goal for this is 5 ideas for each one, and then figuring out, how the characters can move in the world and that sort of thing. Step 4 will be the zero draft, looking at my scenes and picking my starting point, even though I kind of already know where I want to start, and then doing my chapter number and plot chart, and my dialogue and settings chart, and just creating my roadmap. And then finally, the last one, step 5, is obviously my first official draft, stitching everything together and actually making the story. So to get started, I decided to try the program she recommended in the second video called Milanote. Admittedly, I fell in love. I have all of my writing and drafting in one place. I keep all of the stuff for my videos on Milanote. I have such a disorganized brain, but with this app, I can literally put anything in and rearrange it however I want, whenever I want. I can have as many boards as I need. I can throw in whatever pictures. Honestly, I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I do, but it helps keep my chaos organized and scratches my brain in just the right way. I definitely recommend trying it for yourself. So my tentative name for this project is The Black Violin. We follow Oxbriar Zurtarin as they make the journey to a cursed island to try and strike a deal with a shadow. Things aren't as they appear, and Ox ends up discovering dark secrets about their family. I already know where I want to end the story and have an idea on where to start it, like I said, but I get so bogged down writing the middle. Usually I just end up coming up with ideas for individual scenes and then try piecing them together later, but usually ends up a huge mess. With any luck, following this process will help me. I'm planning on seeing this book through to the end, one way or the other. Setting up a designated space for your project is a very important first step. Every project needs a little room to breathe, so my very first Milanote board is actually where I'm going to keep all of my notes. I have the app installed on my computer, phone, and iPad, so I can add my stuff whenever I have an idea. I tested it a lot, and it instantly syncs between all your devices. It's incredibly handy. Following the video, Anna says the first step is to write down anything and everything that you can about your story. I'm going to be trying to follow the videos as close and thoroughly as I possibly can. Now, I didn't end up with a very long list for the story so far, but it is still in its infancy. 'Tis but a seed, an inkling of ponderance. I think I do have enough at least to have a firm start. There were actually a few things I figured out as I was writing in the brainstorm document. I'm glad it was able to shake a few things loose in there. I wrote about the world, the characters and their motivations, what the ending would look like. After puking my brain onto this document, it's time for cleanup. Anna tells us to start with a blurb about the project that tells us the project name, genre, word count, themes and vibes, and a one-sentence summary about it. she suggests naming it Project Dot or P Dot whatever. So in this instance, it's P Dot Violin, since the whole idea started with an image in my mind of someone approaching a shadow silhouetted against a window holding a violin. I'm considering the genre to be horror fantasy. There's really no other descriptors that I think would work for it. The themes follow along the lines of dark, shadows, madness, hopelessness, and unsettling. I'm aiming for 50,000 to 75,000 words, and the whole plot can be summed up into Oxbriar's Taran has been tasked by their father to strike a deal with a shadow on a cursed island. From there, I followed and broke it down into sections. Not all of my sections ended up exactly the same as hers. Everyone's brains work different, so I made sections that worked best for me and my brain and the story. There's characters, story beats, which are things I want to incorporate into the story somewhere, settings, world, creatures, and quotes. I might add some as I go. I don't really use the quotes one, so I might take that off or save it for ones that really stick out to me. After that, it was time to go to Pinterest. In the second video, she suggests going to Pinterest and putting your vibes plus your genre plus aesthetic, then scrolling through to see if anything pops out as settings you can use. I actually had a bit of a difficult time trying to find anything that I could really use in the horror fantasy aesthetic results. I ended up trying dark fantasy and dark fae and a few other prompts to find the pieces. At least I was able to build an aesthetic board to bounce ideas off of. I even found a few random pictures that gave me ideas for things to add into the story. Once I had a good list of setting ideas, I started poking around in Milanote a bit more. There's all kinds of templates. Plotting, character profiles, world building, inspirations. I did end up using a few of them to help keep things together and organized. Each template has examples so you know exactly how to fill it out for yourself, which is really handy when you aren't quite sure how you're supposed to use them. I ended up creating profiles for Oxbriar and the main antagonist, Mazmoon Drux, the Shadow Man in question. They're a little sparse at the moment, but I figure I can fill them out as I go. I drew Oxbriar's profile card myself. I actually had a pretty clear vision of what they looked like. Mazmoon's I found on Pinterest. I imagine him as just a shadow, but in certain lighting you can see his features and see that he isn't just a flat void. I also started playing around with the 3-act structure template, but I always have issues figuring out the actual climax of the story. I know it's when everything comes to a head, but I just have issues separating that from the build-up and the resolution. In this case, I suppose it's when Ox finally confronts Mazmoon and strikes a deal, but not the deal their father wanted. The novel planning template is also really nice. In general, it's an overview of your novel, the name of it, the characters, inspirations, structure, potential covers. All the outline and plotting documents can be kept here. You can keep track of chapters and word counts. It basically acts as your central hub for everything. There's an inspiration section, but I'm not sure if I have an inspiration I can really draw from. It's a horror fantasy, and I personally don't know any that fall under that. Black Violin is set in an epic fantasy world, so I can draw from things like Dungeons and Dragons and Baldur's Gate 3, which may have influenced the world a little bit more than I'd like to admit. Another book that might fit the genre is maybe Dracula, but that's technically set in our Transylvania. The Witcher series is truly the closest I can think of that I've found. I've been trying to hunt down other novels or anything that's in the same vein, so let me know if you have any recommendations. The story map template was interesting. It is a series of questions about the story. The premise tells you to ask a what-if question, so mine was what if Ox's father sends them to do an impossible task? Then there's the stakes, what happens if the story ends in tragedy, which I suppose technically the ending isn't a happy ending, but Ox doesn't die either, so I suppose it isn't tragic in that sense. The core conflict gave me a bit of trouble. I wasn't sure what the opposing sides technically were, Oxbriar versus Mazmoon, or Oxbriar versus their madness or their father. I'll admit, I also ended up at a loss when it came to moral. I'm not sure the story has a moral, or any sort of lesson really. I'm sure all stories are supposed to. Maybe play stupid games, win stupid prizes could be most accurate. That can be said of both Ox and their father in this instance. I struggle with things like this because I know what my story is about, but trying to break it down and spell it all out is incredibly difficult for me. After that, I started setting up for the next part of the process, the actual place plotting. But we're not going to go over all of that in the next video. So let me know what you think down below if there's any other writing processes I should check out. I'm determined to see this all the way through, and I'm so stoked to write Ox's story and share it with all of you. With that, I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, keep dreaming, and farewell.